So when I first covered the sneak peek of what the patch notes had in store for us, we had a more limited understanding of just how influential and massive the changes to next hit delay truly were, because this thing is taking some S tier builds, making them even stronger, B and A tier builds and rocketing them up to the S tier, and also taking completely meme builds that literally shouldn't work, that all of a sudden are kind of like good enough. So I figured I want to make one comprehensive video because I think a lot of information is going to be out there. I've been doing a ton of testing with a lot of the highly respectable members in the D2 community who also have a very deep understanding of how this game works, going over individual mechanics, coming up with ways of testing things, and I think we have a pretty comprehensive list of everything that you need to know about the changes because they're both multifaceted and nuanced. Let's go ahead and jump into it. I'll have timestamps down below to everything that you'll need to look at so you can jump around if you want, and hopefully this answers every single question that you have. So first off, a quick recap on what next hit delay means and how it works. Next hit delay, or next delay as it is in the game files, basically says after a monster or target in general gets hit by a missile. So you think of multi-shot as a missile, you think of shockwave, the big effect that comes out, that's also a missile. Turns out most things in the game are missiles. But after it gets hit by a next delay having missile, it cannot be hit by any other next delay missile for the allotted amount of time. So in this case, multi-shot having 4-frame next hit delay basically stops it from shotgunning, meaning that only one arrow from your multi-shot will ever be able to hit a target within a 4-frame window, and it takes less time than 4 frames for the arrow to pass out of the back of the monster, so you're never going to shotgun with this. It's the same reason why Teeth doesn't shotgun, but if we go through the list of skills that have next hit delay, you'll see some pretty important heavy hitters here. So multiple shot in strafe, lightning strike on the Amazon, chain lightning Nova, frost Nova, poison Nova. But you're also probably pretty well acquainted at this point with the mosaic assassin, so phoenix strike charges 2 and 3 and claws of thunder 2 and 3. This is one of the reasons why you might have been hearing about how fast should my kick speed to be able to beat next hit delay. This was the problem, and it goes on. The list goes further and further. Fissure and Volcano, both from the Druid, as well as Shockweb, Blade, Sentinel, Twister, and Tornado, all had really high next hit delay values, so 25 frames or a full second. If you hit somebody with a Tornado, you couldn't hit them with another Tornado for a full second. And that also meant if you were in a multiplayer game, if somebody hit a monster with a Tornado, and you were a Nova sorceress, you couldn't deal Nova damage to them for a full second. That's what next hit delay used to do. What next hit delay does now is it's per cast. So when you cast the spell or when you use the ability, that particular ability has next hit delay applied to it. What does this mean for you? Well, if you hit a monster with a Tornado, that same Tornado can't do damage to it for a full second, but if you cast another Tornado, your new one can do damage. This has like wild ramifications across the board, and we've spent 8 hours today, just about 8 hours today, fully testing out all of them on stream, and I have some wild build guide videos that are going to be coming out, but let's talk about like the really big impacts here. So if you ever saw my Fire Druid video where I told you need to space out Fissure and Volcano and maximize their area because they both had next hit delay and they would interrupt each other, that just doesn't happen now. So you can drop a Fissure and drop a Volcano and drop a second Volcano and drop a third Volcano. It doesn't matter. Their next hit delays no longer interact with one another. So Fire Druid just gets to walk up and fully nuke one monster or an area with as many AoE effects as it wants to. Same goes for Tornado Druid. Because you used to only be able to deal damage once per second, it didn't really matter if you got to the highest FCR breakpoints because it wouldn't apply. But now you're able to hit a target with 3 tornadoes per second. That's right, you can now hit a target with 3 tornadoes per second as opposed to only 1 tornado per second, at least for the collision damage. It does do AoE damage as well, but that AoE damage like always stacked, but it actually has a 15 frame delay, not next delay, on when it does damage, so it kind of dealt extra damage, but not now. You can literally triple the amount of damage that you can output against a single target with Tornado. Likewise, Twister, something that you would never use ever because it interrupted your Tornado damage, can now apply its stun to a monster 3 times per second if you're casting it at max druid FCR frames. So you can very quickly stun an entire area, and then while they're stunned, still impact them with tornado. So all of a sudden we gained this great survivability tool. Biggest surprise to how this works is with Blade Sentinel. The Blade Assassin was always very strong, but it lacked a lot of pierce and AoE damage, and Blade Sentinel brought some of that to the table, but you could only hit a target with a Blade Sentinel once per second. So even if you had 5 Blade Sentinels going through a target, only one of them ever dealt damage. Now all 5 of them can do damage once per second. This here, just multiplying the Blade Sentinel's total damage output by 500%. You just do 5 times your damage now because they can all do damage within that same second. And it goes even further when you start looking at some other skills like Wake of Fire on the Trapsin. Before, because of the way that the 4-frame next hit delay kind of evened out, you could really only benefit from 2 Wake of Fire traps hitting a target at any given point. In speedrunning, we would drop 2 traps down and then Fire Blast while we were waiting for those traps to use all of their charges. But now, since it's per cast skill, every trap can apply its damage at the same time. So you have increased the total number of traps that can do damage from 2 to 5. It's 150% damage increase. Big change here for Mosaic Assassin is the fact that now individual charges that get used up by your kicks all count as their own skill. So the second charge of Claws of Thunder is the Nova, the third charge is the Charge Bolts. Those both had next hit delay, they would interrupt each other. Nowadays, they will both apply to the target simultaneously. And if you have Phoenix Strike up, the Chain Lightning or the Chaos Frozen Orb will also be able to apply in that same period of time. Now, there are a lot of skills that you're looking at and all of a sudden probably going, oh, that probably means that, you know, the Novas can all do this and that and this and that. I want to clear up some of that confusion because I was getting a lot of it in chat. For multiplayer, it's basically true. Every single skill now only has its own next hit delay, so you could have 8 Nova Sorceresses all standing there Novaing Diablo at the same time and absolutely melting it. You could have 8 Trapsins all dropping 5 Wake of Fire traps. That's 40 Wake of Fire traps. You're going to be absolutely destroying all content with that much firepower under your belt. And the interesting things are all of the stuff that you probably weren't expecting were interacting, but were. So if anybody had an Act 5 mercenary using Battle Cry, that Battle Cry used to interrupt your Nova, as well as running around with a Poison Nova Necromancer who's spamming Poison over all the time. That was stopping your Nova Sorceress. If you had a Fire Druid in your party and you also had a Tornado Druid, they would walk up and do damage, and all of a sudden Diablo couldn't take damage from Nova, Frost Nova, Poison Nova, Shockwave. But now all of that damage can apply at the same time. So for group play, it's ridiculously massive. For single player, it does have really big ramifications. A lot of people are asking about Nova. Isn't Nova now going to do ridiculous damage? And the answer is no. In fact, Nova, in the way that most Novas travel through the game, were already able to hit a target multiple times before their missile was deleted at the end of its trajectory, because of the fact that monsters could move in the same direction as it, and it's only 4 frames, that's 0.16 seconds. So most Nova abilities already hit targets multiple times, especially if they were bigger targets, and double especially if they were moving. But what you have to keep in mind is the only way to beat next hit delay now is if your animation is faster than the next hit delay length. If it isn't, you're not getting more damage out of it. So in the case of Tornado, typically a Druid at the 99 FCR breakpoint has an 11 frame animation. That means after the Tornado comes out, it takes 11 frames for the next one to come out, and then 11 frames for the next one to come out. So you are casting faster than the next hit delay window of 25 frames. That's what I meant when I said you could now hit a monster with 3 tornadoes, whereas before you can only hit them with 1. Because the first frame happens, 11 frames later, another tornado hits them, and then 11 frames later, another tornado hits them, and that's a total of 23 frames. So that's all within the window of the 25 frame next hit delay. Similarly for Volcano, Volcano has a 10 frame next hit delay. So this means now that you're able to stack multiple Volcanoes, because the casting time with the delay was always faster than that, and monsters will be able to get hit by them multiple times as they stand there and continue to output damage. It's the same way with the Wake of Fire trap. Because you can cast multiple of them and they all attack simultaneously, you're able to beat the next hit delay timer, but in situations where you can't beat that time, you're not going to gain anything out of it. So multiple shot, you can't shoot faster than 4 frames, so you're not going to be able to stack on more damage than you previously weren't able to. I saw people asking about lightning strike and chain lightning, and this one's a little bit harder to codify based off of how the skill works in general and whether or not you can quote unquote beat it. So let's go look at another facet of these skills which do affect whether or not you will be able to outsmart the game or get better value out of them. So when we look at chain lightning, the skill, a really important note to read from Amazon Basin here to better understand whether or not you're going to be able to like cheat out extra damage. So the lightning won't necessarily chain between every eligible target before returning to previous targets. However, lightning will only chain back and forth between targets if next delay has expired before the same target is hit again. So when we look at chain lightning, it has a 4-frame next hit delay. And what that little sentence means on Amazon Basin is the thing won't hit a target and successfully chain unless it is no longer within the next hit delay window. So while this does mean that there is a good chance that if you're able to shoot out enough chain lightnings and you have enough targets within a close enough cluster to be able to be hit by individual castings of it, you may get additional damage out of it. It's very impractical and difficult to really quantify just how more efficient that becomes. And I think in a lot of scenarios, the chain lightning will kind of just screw off and hit a bunch of different targets and then eventually expire. It's not to say that you won't get more damage out of them, but it's a lot harder to really quantify it as opposed to some of the other skills. And then the thing that I wanted to talk about, because I think this is going to be one of the best ways to illustrate this, is how the ability to cast multiple next hit delay skills no longer completely incapacitates the other next hit delay skills that your build was able to put out. And I have a really silly werewolf using destruction video that's going to be coming out soon, and I think it highlights this to a great degree. So you probably all know and love the rune word destruction. It's the rune word that you always hoped would be good, and you tried to make work, and you would synergize it, and you would use it, and it would be complete crap, and then you'd be angry that you lost your low, burr, and jaw rune into a phase blade that you're probably never going to use again. If that sounds like an experience that you've had, I want you to know that my heart goes out to you. I feel your pain. But now, it ain't that bad. The important thing to understand here is that it had a chance to cast both Volcano and Nova. Both of these are next hit delay skills, so when one would proc, it would actually interrupt the damage from the other one. And not only that, but the Nova proc from it typically is a much faster missile than the creation of the Volcano missile. So the Nova would come out, and then the Volcano would pop up, and the Volcano wouldn't do any damage, and then it would try to apply its damage, and if within that same window a Nova hit it first, again it wouldn't do any damage. So while you would have this fully synergized Volcano with Max and Armageddon and Fissure and Molten Boulder, the Nova was near perpetually stopping your damage, which is a big problem for the overall viability of the item. Now the interesting thing is that most of us were using an Andariel's Visage on our Mercenary the majority of the time, right? Everybody says put on an Andes Ethereal base with an IAS and Fire Res Jewel, best of the best, right? Well, that was also interrupting your damage because Poison Nova is also a next hit delay skill. So if it was the Nova from the weapon or the Poison Nova from your Mercenary getting hit, which he gets hit fairly often, that was also stopping your Volcano damage, and now it doesn't. And then on top of that, just for giggles, I'm also using a Carrion Wind Ring that has the ability to cast Twister, and also Poison Nova when struck. These two things would also stop each other's damage and effects from applying to targets. So if you're using this thinking, oh, I'm gonna get a ton of Twister procs, you are probably stopping a lot of your damage a lot of the time without ever really realizing it, because how do you quantify how often you get hit with a Carrion Wind on? But now that they've made these changes, this Twister can proc, my Poison Nova can proc, Nova and Volcano can both proc from this weapon, and all of them will apply to the target. Now, this doesn't change how poison damage works. I've been seeing a lot of questions about that, like, oh, does this mean monsters won't interrupt poison damage? Next hit delay had nothing to do with poison damage in any way, shape, or form. You see Poison Nova there in the list. That's just the skill being able to apply its missile to a target, and not the actual poison damage itself. So remember that. That's a really important note. But just to very quickly show you this thing in action, we're going to have our Armageddon. That's not a next hit delay skill. But as we run around, you'll see the Novas coming out. You'll see we're proccing Firestorm. Firestorm also isn't a next hit delay skill. Now we have the Volcano, and you'll see every once in a while our Mercenary will get hit. All of these abilities are now able to apply to targets at their full capacity as long as they are able to do damage to them. Now, they still have next hit delay, so that volcano's physical damage is still interrupting the fire damage from the same skill. It turns out that skills that have multiple next hit delay components, which is actually only volcano, are still going to interrupt themselves, but that's not as big of a problem as it used to be, where the Poison Nova and the Twister and the regular Nova, or a multi-shot Amazon being in your game, used to interrupt that damage by itself. Now you can get the full effect of everything. You can get the full utility from the stun on the Twister. You can get the full utility from the poison damage being on the target, meaning that they won't regenerate in between frames where you're not actively dealing damage, and you're not as hamstrung as you used to be. I think that that covers everything that we were able to test, improve in today's now solid 8 hours worth of testing. And I hope that it goes a long way to be able to clear up any confusion or misinformation or incomplete studies or incomplete testing or theory crafting that people have done. And you're able to make the best informed decision that you're able to possible in your own testing and walking into the new season. If you have any unanswered questions at this point, or if you think I should go into more detail for something, either comment down below or hit me up in the Discord. We're getting a lot more traffic in the Discord where people are able to kind of have the beck and call of some of the best minds in Diablo 2. Like, I'm not talking about me. I'm like, okay, I know a decent amount of the game, but there are a ton of incredibly well-educated people that hang out in the Discord, do a ton of theory crafting and testing, and I am just so deeply appreciative that they choose to congregate in an area where I can kind of bug them and poke them and go, hey, what was that testing? What was that about? But if you have anything, consider coming down into the Discord and hanging out with us, or at the very least leaving a comment so that I know that I can get this information out to people who might have those questions. Again, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.